Welcome to the student walkthrough video for GCSE History, Paper 3, Question 3d. We will look at how the question is constructed, how to answer it, and tips on what makes a good answer. We have other videos available for this paper as a whole and also for each question in detail. The four parts of question 3 are a package and they address the same specified inquiry. You will have already identified that there are two valid interpretations, two sources, and now in question 3d, the culmination of the inquiry, you are being asked how convincing you find interpretation 2. Question 3d asks you to make a judgment about how far you agree with the view expressed in interpretation 2. You need to use your knowledge of what happened at the time, as well as the other view provided, interpretation 1, to decide how far they got it right. It's worth 16 marks and an additional 4 marks are available for your use of spelling, punctuation, grammar and specialist terminology. You should spend around 30 minutes or 38 minutes if you have extra time on this question, taking time to read the interpretations, annotate and plan. The question always begins, how far do you agree with interpretation 2? And you are reminded to use both interpretations and your knowledge of the historical context. Because the question asks how far do you agree with interpretation 2, know what your judgment is before you begin to start writing your answer. So we need to recap the overall views of the two interpretations. You will have already identified the views given in interpretation 2 in question 3b. So in the exam, this will be fresh in your mind. Interpretation 2's viewpoint on the methods used by the Nazis to control the people was that there was a development of the police state to monitor behaviour and to force people to obey, whereas interpretation 1 has the viewpoint that the method used to control people was through the use of propaganda to persuade people to conform. So to establish an overall judgment on how far you agree with the author in interpretation 2, you need to analyse the information they use. Do you challenge or support them? Then it may be helpful to think about how the author has created their view, which you will have explored already in question 3c. Do you agree with the details and the way in which the author has presented them? Remember, they have chosen to focus on certain things, whether that's selection of content or emphasis, and they have chosen to include certain words and language and tone in order to create their overall view or historical interpretation. It may be useful as part of the planning stage to annotate the interpretation, picking out any information you agree with or challenge, and remember you'll need to use your own contextual knowledge to do this. Here are a few examples. Here I've picked up on the author's use of the phrase, the main technique was used to create terror was the use of the law. And while I agree that it was a technique, but not necessarily with the author's claim that it was the main one. And actually, I would argue that the use of concentration camps such as Dachau created in 1933 would have been the main technique used. Now you will know how far you agree with interpretation 2. Consider the phrases that you could use throughout your answer to convey your judgment. This will help you build a coherent answer with a consistent line of reasoning. So if you agree, you could use language such as interpretation 2 correctly claims or is right in the view. However, if you disagree with the view expressed by the author in interpretation 2, you could say they are flawed in their view or it is wrong of them to claim. Try and be firm in your judgment though, sitting on the fence with phrases such as I somewhat agree or I partially agree often means that the answer will struggle to really evaluate and instead often just explains the views rather than evaluates. Before we look at an example answer, it's worth reminding ourselves that there is no expected structure to be used, but students often approach this question by firstly giving reasons why they agree with interpretation 2 and then reasons why they disagree, incorporating interpretation 1 before offering an overall judgment. High-level answers are often well planned and there is a consistent line of reasoning and the judgment is not left until just the conclusion. Let's have a look at this top performing extract from a candidate in 2024. In this answer, the candidate has started by stating their judgment, that they mostly agree with the view given in interpretation 2. And notice how frequently they reference the judgment and the interpretation throughout their answer, and this helps them stay focused with a clear and coherent judgment which the examiner is looking for. They then state the overall view offered by interpretation 2. Remember, you will have already have done this in question 3b, so it wouldn't take you very long. The candidate then picks out more than one detail from interpretation 2 to analyse, and has used quotations to show precise analysis of particular aspects of interpretation 2. The examples they use are about opening letters and listening to phone calls. So consider, what do you know about the Nazis spying on people? Do you think this is a convincing view to have? Is the author right? And so the candidate here goes on to use their contextual knowledge to answer that. They talk about the use of the Gestapo and the law courts, and this helps validate or support the claims being made by the author in interpretation 2. Notice also how the use of own knowledge is relatively concise and small. It's integrating brief details into an evaluation. It's not an own knowledge essay. So once you've examined interpretation 2, you must also examine the challenge that's offered through interpretation 1. The interpretations do not need to be dealt with in equal depth, but both need to be examined explicitly. Forgetting to do so can really limit your marks on this answer. This candidate then goes on to challenge the view presented in interpretation 2. You must do this to access the higher marks. You can do this by picking out aspects of interpretation 2 that you don't agree with, and by using interpretation 1. You do this in the same way as a previously analysed interpretation 2. Pick out the specific details from the interpretation and use your own contextual knowledge to support or challenge what is said. So here, they've picked out the point in interpretation 2 that it was illegal to tell jokes. Then they use their own knowledge on the ill-advised pirates and them telling jokes to challenge what is said by the author in interpretation 2. They then go on to use interpretation 1 as well as a form of challenge. And finally, the candidate here concludes their argument. Did the author of interpretation 2 get it right? Remember, though the question specifically asks how far do you agree with interpretation 2, so your judgment must address this, even if you agree more with interpretation 1. Remembering that this candidate opened their answer by saying that they agree with interpretation 2, and that is followed through here into their conclusion, that they now heavily agree with interpretation 2 and only partly agree with aspects of interpretation 1. This is consistent throughout their answer and is what the examiner is looking for. The examiner is looking for 3 elements: analysis of the provided interpretations. You must use interpretation 1 as well and make reference to the specific details within them both. Failing to use both can really limit your marks available. The contextual knowledge you use is interwoven into your analysis of the interpretations to support or challenge the claims the authors are making. And your judgment is based on your analysis and is well reasoned and evidenced. My top tip for this question is to remember that it's asking you whether the author of interpretation 2 got it right. It's inviting you to be critical. Use contextual knowledge to assess the accuracy of what the author has said, but knowing that this is not an own knowledge essay. For the highest marks, you should show awareness of the way in which the different views are conveyed or presented, for example, tone and language choices. The best answers often have a confident, consistent judgment running through them, so not sitting on the fence or just using a judgment in the conclusion at the end of the answer. And don't forget, there are 4 marks available for spelling, punctuation, grammar and specialist terminology. That brings us to the end of this walkthrough video. Remember, we have videos for every question for each paper available. More information for students can be found on our website under Student Support. Good luck in your upcoming exams.